Ode to Gravity. This is Charles Amirkhanian. Tonight, electro-acoustic music of Uruguayan Armenian composer Coriún Aharonián, one of the most interesting and active experimental composers in South America. In person, Aharonián is a short, very dynamic and sociable individual. Like most composers of new music in Latin America, he's never before been invited to the United States. This program, then, will be the first on U.S. radio devoted to his work. Also, we'll hear a work by his wife, Graciela Paraskevaidis, of Greek-Argentinian parentage. I had the pleasure of meeting Aharonián at the 1982 Swedish Electronic Music Festival. Our interview was recorded late on the evening of October 9th, 1982, after an exhausting day of activities. The discussion took place in the home of Swedish cellist and composer Peter Schubach. My guest is the Uruguayan composer Coriún Aharonián, who was born in Montevideo on August 4th, 1940. He's one of the leading composers in South America. And it's a pleasure, Coriún, to have you on KPFA, because I've heard so much about you and a lot of the, not only your own composing, but all the work that you've done for other composers. You're a very generous man. And it's, I think many people in South America owe a great deal to you for letting the information about their music be known internationally. Now, could you tell us a bit about how you started composing and maybe something about your family in your early life?
Well, I will try to do it. I don't know how I started composing. I began to study music very early. In some moment in my early teenage, I thought that I was interested in composing music, and I began to study. Well, that's all. I studied also other creative disciplines. I studied architecture. I was interested in the creative thing. As for my family came from Western Armenia, from the territory which has been cleaned. This is the expression, cleaned or cleaned off, or I don't know how to say.
Cleared out.
By the Turkish government, and of that period.
What period was that? 1890s or later than that?
No. After in the big massacre.
1915.
Yeah. And well, the two families were from different parts, and they arrived to Uruguay in South America, as many other people from Armenian origin. Well, and
do you know how many Armenians are in Uruguay?
At present, it's very difficult to establish the numbers, but some 15 years ago, when there was not still another new generation, the bishop in Buenos Aires said that the community in Uruguay was of about 10,000 Armenians. This, of course, included the sons and the children. This is not very exact, and in Argentina the number was quite higher, was of some 50,000 Armenians, and some 20,000 perhaps in Brazil in that period.
Have you been active in the Armenian community and political affairs?
I have been active because I understood that I had responsibility towards my parents my origin, and I worked hardly till 1965, till the 15th anniversary of the massacre. But after that, I realized that the Armenian question was for the Armenian communities a false question, that the communities were not very clever about that thing, and it was a dangerous game played by the bureaucrats of the diaspora. And I arrived to the conclusion that I was not disposed to fight for a ghetto, but for a real Armenian question. And as many other young people whose parents were Armenian, I decided not to continue working for a ghetto. I am against the ghetto. I think the ghettos are a fascist thing, and I don't want to support this situation. And I think Latin America needs people working in the cultural field, and I have tried since then to be a good worker in the cultural field in Latin America.
Right now, the relations between the U.S. and Latin America are at the lowest possible point in late 1982. And there is a feeling among people in America that Latin Americans somehow don't have the ability to govern themselves because they always have dictators running around.
Well, I can ask the North American people who said this, what's the ability of North America or the USA to have good governors? That's all.
So it's apparent to you that the situation would not be the case if America didn't involve itself in Latin American affairs so constantly.
Well, I think our situation, our political situation, is only a consequence of the imperialistic situation. So the answer of that must be given by the United States and not by us. We cannot do what we want with our countries and in our countries. We are obliged to do what the United States want to do with us. So there is no question.
Now, the answer from many people of your generation who are composers is to go to Europe and to live very well off the subsidies that composers can find. We now are not talking in Montevideo, we are in Stockholm, which is a quite different situation for composers, even different from America, because there's an opportunity here to be a composer and to live very well from that. Any thoughts about that?
Well, first of all, please don't say America for the United States of America. You have robbed our name, and I, as a Latin American, I cannot accept it. You are not Americans. You are so Americans as we are Americans. So I think it's time to begin to think that you must find a name for yourselves.
Lou Harrison used to call us Usonians.
Yeah, it's better.
And anyway, it was a name from Italy. It's not a name from South America. It was Amerigo Vespucci, as I recall.
Yeah.
So let's give it all back.
Yeah, but we must ask the Indians. It will be quite difficult.
But what do you feel about composers who leave South America to have a more comfortable situation abroad? That's the question.
Well, I think the comfortable situation must come not from the fact of being composer, but from other activities. If this composer is making something socially interesting for that society in which he is living, I think the creative activity must not be paid as a creative activity, because if it is paid, the result is a dependence of the creator from this payment. So the creative action is no more activity to make the society better, but only quiet activity to keep the society as it is. And this is not the responsibility of the artistic creators.
So it's impossible to be a composer and to be commissioned by a government and not be owned by the government in some sense.
Well, I think the idea of a commission is different, for to say. I think a commission is a quite unique situation. You have one commission, you have not 10 commissions or one commission per year. And so in the countries where commissions can exist, this is I think a different situation. In Europe, the most usual thing, not in all Europe but in many countries, is that if you are a composer, you have the natural right to live freely, and without any problems, economical problems, only because you are a composer. You have a paper that says that you are a composer. This is the same in the socialist countries, or the so-called socialist countries, and that's quite dangerous, because the culture is still in evolution through a new culture of a new society, and we cannot do what is established, because if we do this thing, we will not work for the future society.
But what about a composer who is in a socialist or Marxist state, which is working? Let's say a composer in Cuba. Should he be working against the government in a subversive way when he writes his music?
I think the fact of being composing in the sense of the history doesn't mean to compose against the government, because perhaps the government is also in the sense of the history. So I think it is a question of being composing against the established values in culture, which is quite different. And this can be applied in Cuba or in the States. When you have a difference of social and economical and political aspects, it's not the evidence of differences in cultural aspects. It's very easy to historically we have many examples to make a political and a military process without having a cultural process, and in some decades lose the fighting, lose the struggle because of the cultural aspects. This has been the question of all Latin America since the independence from Spain and Portugal. We have had this revolution, but this military and political revolution has not been accompanied by a cultural revolution. So as the culture has remained colonial, this has been the first and the principal point to affirm a colonial situation in the field of the political and the military and the economical.
Maybe you could tell us a bit about one of the pieces of yours that we're going to hear. We'll start with a piece which was composed in 1969. It has a very enigmatic title.
Well, the title, Que.
That means what? Or
No, it means that.
that.
In the middle of a
Is it
sentence.
a question?
No.
It's a statement. That.
No, because in the piece, this word has many meanings. Not very much, but many. And well, it's only that the solution is at the end of the story, for to say.
Did you make this with tape, this piece?
Yeah, the piece has been made totally with electronic sources. It's absolutely electronic, except the human voice. There is a kind of counterpoint, for to say, or alternance between the human being and the human voice with this text and the electronic elements. The electronic elements has been done with the traditional electronic studio, with generators, modulators, filters, and shapers. And
what studio?
in the studio of the Di Tella Institute in Buenos Aires, and which has disappeared some few years after. I was at that moment a student in the Latin American Center for Advanced Musical Studies, and while I was working in the studio there, and we were discussing very much, the students of this Latin American Center, about how to use the spoken word or the words in music, and the words with some content in music, and what was the way or the possibility of using words without destroying them. And well, perhaps this piece has been the result of these discussions. I am not very sure.
Well, let's listen to it. This is called Que, and it is by Coriún Aharonián.
Qué bueno que... que respiras. Que conspiras.
You just heard a composition by Coriún Aharonián entitled K, composed in 1969 in Buenos Aires at the Di Tella Institute, which, by the way, Coriún, was a fantastic place for a number of years, I hear.
It was a very interesting place because it was the place of meeting of many young composers from very different countries from Latin America. It was more, it has been the normal quantity, that more than a dozen per year. It's not really each year, because the period of studies was of 2 years, 2 complete years, well, some 22 months, and there was a selection made by competition, and the jury selected each 2 years a number of students which received a grant, and at that moment was a very well paid grant, just to move to Buenos Aires and to stay there for 2 years studying and composing. It had been not possible to continue this experience because the supporters of the institute were foundations, and among them 2 North American, 2 Usonian foundations, the Rockefeller and the Ford foundations, that decided not to continue with the
Funding.
Experience. Yeah,
They dropped out.
Yeah, because they found it that it was not very interesting to prepare creators in Latin America.
Yeah.
This has been very important for us because we have discovered the creators in Latin America, that imperialism wants not to have creators at all in the third world. It is very important for the imperialistic situation to have the creators only in the metropolitan area, just to export all the cultural products, because independent and autonomous cultural product it seems that it can be dangerous.
Is that also true for business and for intelligent people in the professions? They try to buy them to come to other countries in a way?
Yeah, of course, technology must be bought also from the metropolitan area. We are not allowed to make our own technology.
Which explains the situation in Cuba during the embargo when they couldn't get tape or tape recorders just to make recordings of things, yeah?
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
You don't fear that there should be some repercussion if the government in Uruguay hears about our discussing this?
About the colonial situation, I think the Uruguayan government has learned very much after the Malvinas affair. We have learned very much about the real attitude of the United States towards Latin America during this crisis of the so-called Falkland Islands.
So even a government which is quite reactionary can now be radicalized?
Well, perhaps not radical at all, but in any case less naive than before.
I would like to ask you about the courses for Latin American music which you do.
Excuse me,
Yeah, go ahead.
one thing more.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't think my government is more reactionary than your government. Excuse me.
We're talking with Coriún Aharonián, the mad Armenian from Uruguay, and we're going to hear next a piece called Homenaje. Before we do that, I do want to ask you about the courses for Latin American music. I've heard that this is a very exciting time when people from around Central and South America get together and they talk about compositional problems and about, well, everything from music to politics. When do these happen and how are they organized?
Well, this is a possibility to learn many things about musical creation and to discuss many things about music. And it is organized since 1971 by a group of persons who try to be useful for the continent, for the culture of Latin America, and nobody receives payment for it, and nor the organizers nor the teachers. They understand that they are working for the culture and for of Latin America and for the good or better formation of the musicians, of the young musicians of Latin America.
So how can somebody afford to go from, say, a country in the south of South America all the way to, let's say, Venezuela, where you have the next institute scheduled?
Well, we try to move the courses through Latin America just because the distances in Latin America are very very big, very long. That's a good word. And even if the courses are very cheap, the distances are not very cheap. And so as the courses are each year in a different place, they give the possibility of different people to be students at that special course.
You know, we don't use the term course so much when we have a convention of people, because most of our composers study in universities. Are these actually courses like you would have in a university, or are they discussions and workshops? Would you say they're workshops?
Yeah. We have a big quantity of workshops and discussions or places and moments to discuss. The discussion in these Latin American courses is the principal thing. But well, I don't know if you have in English another word to say place and opportunity to study. How can you call it?
I don't know. I think maybe workshops we would say, because there would not be
Well,
you would not give grades to people at the end, for example, in that sort of defense.
No, not at all.
Yeah, okay.
But I think that's more your problem than our problem. And, well, in the Latin American courses, we all the people who is working there try to make a thing, a useful thing, through subjects which are done as courses, with exposition of the subject.
So you focus on an aspect of composition, let's say.
Yeah, for instance, if you are dealing with aspects of the history of the musical creation in the 20th century, you are making an exposition, and it's not a workshop at all. But the courses try to have a very, for to say, dialectic aspect, and there is no truth. The courses are not giving a truth to the people, so people understand that they must look for truth themselves, each one of them.
So this is a stimulation you're trying to give the student. I mean,
yeah, the courses try to, this can be the word in English, to stimulate people to think about the compositional things and all the musical thing through the rest of the year or the next years. It's not very easy to think about the things, as you know, and we don't receive an education to think about the things we are doing. And in Latin America we need to think, just not to repeat models of others. If we must work for our culture, for our music, we must think on what we are doing or we are trying to do. And if we think about it, perhaps the result will be better.
Coriún Aharonián has composed a piece in 1974, in June of that year, and then another one in September of 74, which is unusual for you, that you don't usually do so many pieces. You're sort of a person who thinks a long time before you compose something.
Yeah.
What happened in 74 then?
Well, I don't know exactly, but both pieces were begun in 1970. They have been in progress. It's the word in English.
Or process.
Or
in process
for 4 years. Oh. So it was a moment when they exploded.
Did you have a particular program for the piece Homenaje?
Well, in Homenaje a la flecha clavada en el pecho de Don Juan Díaz de Solís, I try to render a double homage. First one to the real owners of the land of the Americas, dispossessed of it by the European conquest. I wanted to avoid the declamatory homage, the romantic or the plaintive or the ethnocentristic philanthropic one. I wanted to avoid the postcard, the fragmented photograph. I paused in front of that other culture which, although defeated, has anyway participated in the formation of today's Latin American men. And I wanted to respect that culture every moment. This is why the flutes have not been distorted. The piece has been exclusively built up with sounds produced by indigenous flutes of the Aymara and Quechua regions in South America. 3 pincujos, 2 high-pitched and 1 very high-pitched, 4 quenas, 2 high-pitched and 2 low-pitched.
What is a quena?
A quena is a vertical flute without mouthpiece. 2 anatas, or tarcas, it depends on the language, on the indigenous language.
What are those?
Is a vertical flute with mouthpiece, but made with a piece of wood in a very strict measure, in a very strict shape, very strange, very complicated, and very geometrical. And and the sikus. The sikus is the pan flute of this region. Well, all of the flutes performed by me. And the flutes keep their natural, for to say, sound, and even their breath sound, which is typical. This is very important from the expressive point of view, in the real situation, in the actual situation of these instruments. The electroacoustical studio possibilities have indeed been used, but in order to elaborate the original sonic material and not to denaturalize it. I tried to base myself on the sonic inflections and gestures that are peculiar to those flutes in their habitual context. Obviously, I feel very far from the rhapsodistic or naively exotist attitude to which transcriptions could lead. It is because of this that there are indigenous flutes and there are ways of sounding, but there are no little Indians with feathers, nor pentaphonic melodic fragments accompanied by electronic blips. The second homage is for an Indian in particular, and for his historical option. Juan Díaz de Solís had been the chosen one by the Spanish crown to impose its domination. The word at that time was discovering, as you know, over the land of the southern part of the new continent. Nevertheless, neither Cortés' methodology nor the Pizarro's doctrine could be practiced by this gentleman, who had to bequeath his mission to future substitutes. He was appropriately received by an effective indigenous arrow, so the chronicle says, the moment he stepped on the land which is now Uruguay.
So that's the story of this piece. It's really about...
It's not the story of the piece. The story... well, I have told the story, but I beg the listener not to condition his audition to the explanation of the title. This is the explanation of the title. And not of the piece. Homenaje a la flecha clavada en el pecho de Don Juan Díaz de Solís is not program music or programmatic music. The link between the story of Solís and the course of the composition limits itself to the title and to its contents, to its meaning, but in no case to its anecdote.
This is a piece composed in 1974 by Coriún Aharonián, Homenaje a la flecha clavada en el pecho de Don Juan Díaz de Solís. You've just heard a composition by Coriún Aharonián, Homenaje a la flecha clavada en el pecho de Don Juan Díaz de Solís, which is amazing piece, really, Coriún. And this, it is important, I think, for people to realize that this piece, composed in Uruguay, is also recorded in Uruguay on a disc, which is circulated around the world. It's a fantastic thing because we don't often see records from Latin America of contemporary avant-garde music at all in our record stores in North America. We do see them, but it's very, very rare. Did you yourself produce this series of records of contemporary music with other composers?
Well, this series called Música Nueva Latinoamericana, new Latin American music, or Latin American new music, has been produced by a group, culture group, trying to do useful things for the Latin American culture in the field of discs.
For dissemination of the music, obviously, yeah. And how many records do you make of each one? 500, 1,000, or?
Between 500 and 1,000.
Uh-huh. Is it possible for people who listen to this broadcast to send a certain amount of money and receive a copy of a record? Is this one, for example, still available?
Yeah, it can be done, yeah.
And what is the amount of money that it would cost in US dollars?
Well, I'm not very sure.
With the mailing, it would be about $10, don't you think? Because it's expensive to mail it and to...
Yeah, perhaps some $11, included the mailing.
And you also have a record of a fantastic man from Bolivia, which I was very impressed with. Maybe you could say something about this man, Sergio Prudencio.
Well, Sergio Prudencio is one of the youngest composers in Latin America. He's Bolivian. He was born in 1955 in La Paz, the capital city of Bolivia. And he has a very good formation as a composer, as a conductor, and also as a researcher.
The piece you recorded had indigenous instruments, I think.
Yeah, the piece has been the result of hard work in the direction of the Bartók's work. Sergio Prudencio and some other colleagues of him, young as he is, of the same generation, worked hardly for a good time, trying to begin to study seriously the indigenous cultures of their country, Bolivia. And they just began the work because the university was closed after that. But they arrived to make a marvelous job, because they not only made a research, but the application of the research to educational work. They began to teach how to play these instruments to enthusiastic group of students of the Central University of the country, the National University of La Paz. They formed an orchestra of 50 members with different kinds of these indigenous flutes and drums, and they made another very interesting thing, to compose pieces for these instruments played by these people. And the best result of this, before the end of the activity of the university and of this orchestra, was this composition by Sergio Prudencio called La Ciudad, based on a poem by Blanca Witthüchter, a marvelous piece which will be performed now in the international festival in Graz.
I think we have time now to hear about another piece of yours, which is an important one called Gran Tiempo. You wrote this also in 1974, and it's also a tape piece, about 15 minutes long. I was impressed with the sharpness of the sounds in this piece and how beautiful the recording is, and how you made such a spectacular, well, they're really sound sculptures that fly around in space, and they're very effective and very powerful. Maybe you could say a little bit about how you work with these sounds.
Well, I don't know. I worked from the expressive point of view as a result of a necessity of expression.
Is it a synthesized sound that we're hearing?
No, it's
not.
Only microphonic sound is or acoustic, as you want to. I don't know, how do you prefer?
Yeah, acoustic sounds recorded with a microphone.
Yeah, through a microphone. And
What is the first sound you hear there? That really high one. How did you make
first?
That? Yeah.
The first is
a little
a
peeping
sound produced originally with with a match.
Were you striking a match on a matchbox?
On its box, yeah.
Wow.
And it has been a succession of
modulation?
No, there is nothing. It's this sound, and there is also in some moment the sound of the match introduced in water. And
it's brilliant.
Yeah, I don't know, but it's the result of a research of certain textures. I needed certain textures, and I began to think about how to obtain this thing, this special thing, or this another thing.
Yeah, but it also has a symbolic meaning, doesn't it? I mean, you have a flame which is being extinguished.
Yeah.
That's very important to understand that, because the title, which means these great times, is an ironic title, no?
Yeah. Well, there are, of course, many meanings in the. Perhaps you are right in the election of materials too, of the materials that produce the textures I wanted. But this is a private thing. Perhaps I am not interested in
literal.
I think it's not important at all. Yeah, this is a personal, a private thing, and I think it is important for me, but I don't think it is important at all for people who is listening. Whereas for the title is not mine. I have borrowed it from a poet because I think it expresses in a quite precise manner that Latin American idiomatic way between the ironical and the transcendental, between the sad and the very happy, between the pain and the no brother, it's nothing, between the circumstantial doubt and the historical certainty. That Latin American idiomatic way to define our special moment, our beautiful and terrible moment in Latin America, given at the level of the tiny, of the small things, of the somebodies that agitate their life, as the poet said, of the addition of individual experiences that go on building stone by stone the collective us of an unavoidable tomorrow. Gran Tiempo is settled within this tiny level.
The overall form of the piece, maybe you could just give the listener a clue of what is about to happen.
The treatment of the material is one normally allowed by a well-equipped electro-acoustical studio. Within the response limits attainable nowadays. The studio in this case was the Caribde studio of the Bourges group, the Groupe de Musique Expérimentale de Bourges. And although in this case the extreme frequency zones do not play an important role, the possibility of stretching out the dynamic range to its maximum does indeed. The piece gives great importance to the use of silence, understood not as a whole but as a sound space.
Let's listen now to Gran Tiempo by Coriún Aharonián. You've just heard a composition entitled Gran Tiempo by Coriún Aharonián, who's our guest on this program. He's a Uruguayan composer living in Montevideo, and we're visiting with him in Stockholm. The next piece is called Salvad los Niños, or Save the Children. It was composed in 1976. And before we hear it, I'd like to ask Coriún to say just a word about this piece. Again, this is a tape piece, Coriún?
Yeah, well, the different pieces of this program are all tape pieces. Salvad los Niños.
It's a short piece. Huh?
Is very short, yeah. Well, I don't know if it is very short, but it is short.
6 minutes. Now, I think that's a short
Less than
piece.
6, yeah.
You were saying that in Latin America, a short piece is different from a short piece in Europe, and a long one in Latin America would be 20 minutes, whereas a long one here is 6 hours sometimes. Is that true?
Well, yeah, the perception of time is quite different in Latin America. There is no scientific study of it, but the composers, we know that it is like this because we have discussed very much about it in many opportunities. And there is a fact that people cannot deal with very long durations, as is usual in Europe. The pieces of 1 hour or more. And it seems that people in Latin America has a more concentrated listening.
In America, we would say that's a bad thing because you probably are a TV child and you can only stand something if it's 2 minutes and very snappy.
Well,
it's not the same. You're not saying that's the same.
No. It's quite different. I think it's very different. Perhaps it's the contrary of this kind of listening. I think it's the only way of definition is to say that it is a very concentrated listening. I don't find another way to define it.
So these pieces that go for 6 hours in Europe, very often they invite people to go in and out and go to the bathroom and have something to eat and walk around and.
Well, this is different. This is not a part of the European culture. This is a bad copy of the North Indian, from India, the North Indian culture, and not well understood by the European musicians. This is quite different, and in any case, for that it is necessary to have another kind of musical structure and another kind of musical thought, because this is done through modal music, which is always in the same place, even if it is not in the same place, but you can enter and go away and return how many times you want, because when you return, the piece is in the same place. But if you stay, the piece is changing every second. So this is a very different way of thinking, and Europeans are making a big mistake, a big historical mistake, when they try to save their ship, robbing things from other cultures. This is an old story, but in any case, it's not a way to save their ship. If Europe feels that the history of Europe is arriving to the end, at least they must try to create elements for a new culture and not to rob things from others, which is absolutely ridiculous from a historical point of view.
They should go back and rob the Vikings instead.
No, they must try to find the things in themselves. No. In any case, yeah, Europe has a tradition of pieces of more than half an hour that for them are acceptable durations. Of course, there are longer pieces and shorter pieces, but the relative duration is longer than for the Latin American composer and for the Latin American listener.
Who are the children we're saving here?
Well, Salvad los Niños, that can be translated as Save the Children, tries to eavesdrop into the question of the emotional tearing and of the intellectual estrangement caused by the bourgeois capitalist society upon its members, expressed at the small and caricaturable level of individual alienation, at the level of the magnifying and accusing mirror represented by the madman, or the so-called madman. The brief text used belongs to Nikolai Gogol's Diary of a Madman, while the title has been extracted from the homonymous Diary of a Madman by Lu Hasun. The voice used to compose this piece belongs to the Uruguayan actor Armando Alti.
This is Salvar los Niños by Coriún Aharonián.
De noviembre. 12 de noviembre. 12 de noviembre. 12 de noviembre. 8 de noviembre. 6 de noviembre. 9 8 de noviembre. 6 de noviembre. 6 de noviembre. 8 de noviembre. 8 de noviembre. 4 8 de octubre. 4 de octubre. 12 de noviembre. Sin fecha. 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 Día sin fecha. Sin fecha. Día sin fecha. Sin fecha. Sin fecha. Día sin fecha. Día sin fecha. Día sin fecha. Sin fecha. Día sin fecha. Ahora no hay día. Sin fecha. No hay mes. Ahora no hay día sin fecha. Día sin fecha. No hay mes. Día. No hay mes. No hay mes. Ahora no hay mes sin fecha. Ahora no hay mes. Ahora sin fecha. Hoy es. No hay mes. Ahora no hay mes. No. Hoy es. No hay mes. Ahora no hay mes. No sé. Hoy es. Hoy no hay mes. No sé. Ahora no hay mes. Hoy es. No sé. Hoy es. No sé. Hoy es. No sé. Hoy es. Hoy es. No sé. Hoy es. No sé. No sé. Hoy es. No. 3, día 27, día 1, fecha, día 1, 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 día 1.
You've just heard Salvar los Niños, composed in 1976 by Coriún Aharonián, our guest on this program. And we'll hear finally a composition of his called Esos Silencios, These Silences. Now, this is a piece from 1978, or is it Those Silences?
Those. Yeah.
Those Silences. About this piece, the composer's written, those silences are the silences of our daily vital experience in almost all Latin America. They are there, but they aren't, and they exist, but they don't. We don't desire them, but they surround us always until we finally succeed in breaking them. Are you saying, in other words, that although you really want to speak out about something, you dare not, and you sort of repress the urge to do that, and then finally you hopefully will break through that inability to speak? Is that it?
Perhaps.
Or one aspect of it, maybe, huh?
Yeah, I don't know if it is necessary to explain more the thing. I think, I hope the piece is quite expressive. If not, it's my fault. And in this piece, the materials are also exclusively microphonic. There are no electronic sounds.
So all acoustic sounds that you've recorded.
Yeah.
Did you make this in your studio?
In this case, yeah, the treatment of the sounds has been more simple, more austere, more elementary, and I tried to do it in the more elementary situation as possible, in a more Latin American situation. And I used very few elements, or technological elements.
This is a piece, Esos Silencios, by Coriún Aharonián. Esos Silencios by Coriún Aharonián, who is a composer from Uruguay, of Armenian background. It would not be possible to end the program without talking to you a bit about the music of Graciela Paraskevaidis, who is your wife, but who is also a very promising composer who is originally from Greece. Is that correct? She was born in Greece, or
No,
her
no.
family is from Greece?
Her father is from Greece. Her mother is from Argentina, but the parents of her were from Greece.
Grandparents, then?
The parents of her mother.
Of her
the
mother.
Grandparents of Graciela.
But she was born, as you were, in Uruguay.
No, Graciela was born in Buenos Aires,
in Buenos
Argentina.
Aires, which is very close.
Yeah, it's very close, but is another country.
Definitely different. Graciela has been working for how many years on her music?
Well, Graciela has been a successful composer quite before myself. She has a more interesting career, and well, we are born in the same year. She is living in Uruguay, well, because she decided to move to Uruguay.
Maybe you could tell me a bit about her way of working in music. Does she have a particular style, would you say?
Well, I don't know if I can explain how she works. Well, she works, I can say that she works very seriously. That's perhaps a definition. She's very worried about the expressive problem too, and she has been dealing a lot of time with the human voice, and with words, much more than myself.
So both of you perceive that there's a crisis in music, a sort of lack of expressivity in a lot of avant-garde music, that you would like to correct that situation. And is that right?
Well, the fact is that probably in richer societies, it is possible not to think on what you are doing when you are doing something. But in our society, in our Latin America, there is no place to play games when making art products or artistic products.
Well, it's not then that the people who are making a more abstract music don't think about what they're doing. They think about it a lot, but they still make something that lacks expression and lacks communication.
When I think you can make something with no expression when you are nothing to say, well, you have nothing to say.
To communicate.
Yeah, if you have something to communicate, obviously it will be in your music. This is a very important thing, a very elementary thing.
Now, what piece do I have of Graciela's?
Wauki.
Yeah, that's the one particularly. Could you speak a bit about that piece?
Wauki has been composed in our little cooperative studio in Montevideo, in Uruguay, in 1975. It aims at a sensitive and expressive approach based on sound events having a non-discursive function and whose essential characteristics are a voluntary and imposed simplicity in the choice of the material and its manipulation. Well, the word Wauki is a Quechua word referred to a small statue carved by the Incas and resembling their own image. The idea and concept of the term came to mean brotherhood, friendship, community.
We'll now hear Wauki a composition by Graciela Paraskevaidis.